Okay, I believe we're live. Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Aspiring Lawyer's Guide. We've got a very special guest today with us, Sneha Ajay. Um, and I'm very excited, and I'd like to thank you, first of all, for your time, of course, and being here. I know you've got a very busy schedule. Um, I'm going to ask you to kind of go through some of your background, but very briefly, Sneha's a second-year associate at Osler, and I think she'll speak more about that. But if I can start you off, just please introduce yourself, tell us your name, and tell us a bit of your background, your internationally trained background, and where you were licensed before getting licensed in Canada, please.
Thanks for having me, Liren. It's really a pleasure to be here, especially after, the long journey of like the NCA and everything that you helped me with. So yeah, in terms of background, I finished law school in India. I graduated 2014. No, 2000.
I
Yeah,
think
it's
your
been a
call to the bar wasn't 14. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. It's been a while. Wow. Yeah. And then I practiced for 2 years. So now at this point, I've had more work experience in Canada than I have in India. I litigated very generally. I was a general practitioner for 2 years. I did briefly move to Singapore and I worked there for a year, but I didn't get called to the bar there. And then I eventually made my way to Canada and now I'm in Toronto.
Wonderful. And of course, you're working at one of the larger firms, and we'll kind of get to that a little bit later, and we'll talk about your experience. But um, how was the licensing process for you? How long did it take you to go through that process? You know, starting with, of course, the NCA accreditation process, and then going into the lawyer licensing process.
Yeah, so it took a while because when I made my way here, like 2018, at the time, to be very honest, like I think ITLs and the NCA and things were still very new on Bay Street. Like people weren't aware just because I think that the number of ITLs on Bay Street it wasn't a common occurrence. And so it took a while for me to actually start the process and be confident that I could actually make it through the entire thing and be called to the bar. So, although I started working at Osler in 2018, I only started my NCAs in 2020 when the pandemic hit, because it took a while. As you know, it is also an investment and a financial investment, not just a time investment. And so I wanted to be confident that I was able to do that. And so I wanted to work my way up to it. And so I started the process in 2020. It took me, I want to say, 9 months to get through the NCAs. But I think it was also in the previous it used to be different. Like I think the scheduling is different now, but this was in the previous method of scheduling where it happened every
4 times a
yeah
year
four times a year.
over a 1 week period.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's the way that
Yeah.
I did it, and I think I took them one at a time, and so I finished in about 9 months. And then in 2021, I did the bar exams. I did the barristers first, and then I did the solicitors later.
So were you working at the same time as
Yes,
going through the NCA
the whole
process? Is that
time.
why that's why you spread them out
Yes,
when you
the
joined?
entire time I was with Osler, and um, yeah, so working and studying at the same time is, challenging. So you have to put that time away, and so yeah,
Of
that's why
course.
I took the time to do it. And um, it does take time, even if you rush through it. The fact is that it takes time for them to grade and for it to come back, and so I think it's better to give yourself the time to like prepare and do it well the first time as opposed to like rushing through it.
Yeah. So it was interesting. You said you went from India then to Singapore. Why the move to Canada? And when you moved to Canada, because you didn't start that licensing process right away, was the expectation that you would be practicing law? Was that the reason for coming to Canada? Curious.
No, I didn't move to Canada to practice law here. I moved for personal reasons, but obviously because practicing law was the only thing I knew how to do, I didn't want to shift gears, and
Yeah.
so I decided to just go down that path and stick with it. But obviously once I started, because everything, like I said, like everything takes time, I knew that I would have to give myself that runway to be able to do the exams, um, and like complete the assessment. Um, because the NCA only gives you that much time to finish all the exams, and I didn't want to start it and then have to like take a really long break. So yeah, so I just gave myself that time to be able to do that. But I definitely knew that I wanted to do it. But like I said, I want to be absolutely sure and very prepared before I started it.
Hmm. Tell me about getting a job while working. Sorry, while before even starting the NCA process. You got a job at a big law firm. What were you doing? And tell me about the process of applying for that job.
Yeah. So like I said, like the market back then was very different. Like ITLs are very like it was almost an alien concept on Bay Street. Like I had to explain what it meant to be an ITL and what the NCAs are. Like they just didn't know. Like law firms that I interviewed with just didn't know where to place someone with my experience. I think that's what they struggle with. It's not anything else. Like I think they just don't know. Like compared to someone with a Canadian um, education, like where do we place someone with international experience in the system? So when I was interviewing, I interviewed widely. Like I kept applying and I kept like talking to people, but I was also like reaching out, networking with people on LinkedIn, just meeting with anyone who was willing to meet with me. And that's actually how I was able to land my interview with some of the law firms, including Osler, was I established like connections with people that work at the firm. And because I know that oftentimes like what I understood from speaking to people is that like even though people are very like everyone, you have good credentials, like you have a good resume, but like if it doesn't end up in front of the right person, sometimes you it's a missed opportunity. And so I was able to, because of a connection that I made within the firm, I was able to get my resume in front of the right person. And so I got the interview. And once I got the interview, I was able to show that, okay, I can proceed to the next round. And then of course, like dialing it back a little bit, I first applied to be an assistant. Um,
Okay.
yeah, and that's how I entered the firm. Like my first role there was as in an assistant position.
Hmm.
And I, like, granted, it, it's not like I believe in dignity in labor. And so I thought that, it was a good opportunity for me to understand what the Canadian work culture would be like, what it's like to work for a big law firm on Bay Street. And so
Hmm.
that opened up that opportunity for me. And also in hindsight, like I think it also helped me like network within the firm, like make those connections, make those friendships. Like that also has helped me a long way because like in preparing for my bar exam and preparing for the NCAs, like I had people to sort of like help me, like give me advice and guidance. And so if you ask me if I would go back and change any of that, I wouldn't. Like I think that it was a good thing that I was able to have that experience at OSA, or even if it was as an assistant.
Hmm. And I don't know if it was difficult. I mean, you tell me you're already a practicing lawyer. You've got a few years of litigation experience, and now you're taking a position that's non-legal or non-lawyer. I don't know if it was it a legal assistant role or non-legal. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, it was a non-legal role. It's like just legal support. It was more administrative, but for a lawyer.
Hmm.
I leveraged that as a learning experience because you really get to see how they practice law here. And, you know, I, it, at least for me, it it was incredibly different from what I had experienced back in India. Like the approach, the practice is different. Like it is a common law jurisdiction, but I think, like I said, the approach, the practice, um, how things are done, and also like when it's a Bay Street firm, like they have their own like in-house softwares and like practice management tools that I thought it was a good learning experience for me to get used to those tools and how the lawyer use those tools to better their practice management. So I thought it was overall really good, because when I started my articles, like it was not new to me. It
Hmm.
was an easy transition because I had already used the system. Like I was used to how things were practiced at the firm, and so I was able to leverage that to my benefit. And all I had to focus on was my articles and like actually doing the substantive work.
Hmm. Interesting. I mean, one of the themes in this series, the Aspiring Lawyers series, is I want internationally trained lawyers who are watching and going through the licensing process or going through the process at the FLSC. Um, I want them to hear other people's experiences, and you hear a lot of talk about, oh, it's impossible, to get into a Bay Street firm, and yet there are a number of, internationally trained lawyers at Bay Street firms. Um, I don't know if you have other colleagues that are kind of similar situation as you at Osler. I mean, could you speak to that? Do you think there are a lot of people in your position? Um,
Um, so I know that there's been a surge of Bay Street firms, you know, um, that are taking in ITLs in legal positions and as lawyers. They're more open to it now. I think over the last 3 years, that's increased because I did it. I have a few friends who've done it at other Bay Street firms. So it's no longer a new concept. And so they're aware of it and they're sort of like understanding how, like I said, how to fit us into that. Because like it is like, it's just like, I'm sure, you're probably aware of this, but when people move to Canada, like you do like a world education like assessment kind of thing to sort of
yeah.
see what your education is as compared to like the Canadian education system. And so it's similar to that, is like they're like, okay, how can we equate this experience to someone who went to Canadian law school and like did the 1L and 2L, and where do we place this person? And so I think they're getting used to that exercise now, and so they're more open to considering ITLs in legal positions on Bay Street. Um, sorry,
And do you think that gave you some sort of an advantage? Because you're kind of fighting against the tide here,
yeah,
right? You are going against candidates who have OCIs, on-campus interviews. You are totally out of that cycle, out of that loop, trying
yeah,
to make connections, as you said, through networking.
yeah,
How do they equate? Like, do you think they placed weight on that legal experience?
yeah. So I think that whether or not they place weight in that legal experience comes very much from each individual person and how you present yourself at at the workplace, or like with whomever it is that you're having that conversation with. Because like I said, because I had that initial experience at Osler, I was able to showcase that, this is my skill set and this is what I have to offer. And you tell me if this is, if this can be translated into associate life at your firm. And so I think that's why I think networking is so important. And today, I think there's so many people that have started like really helpful, I, I guess like associations or like organizations that sort of help ITLs with this process. Like I know that there are these lawyers. I believe it's called Just One Yes, And I think like, just different initiatives like this that help ITLs like connect with Bay Street law firms. And like going in, I know that Bay Street law firms now like offer like in-house, like, like they have these meet and greets, and they invite ITLs specifically to come and socialize and understand how they can make an entry into the firm. And so I would say like take those opportunities if your like pathway isn't necessarily, if you don't want to waste a year being an assistant, or you don't want to start at 1L or 2L, like I would say use these opportunities to like meet with people at the firms that you're interested in and make those connections. So, and I just think that unless they see you and meet you and know that it's, unless you make that connection, they're not going to know that you're going to be a good fit, because there's so many things that go into deciding if a person will be a good fit at the firm. And yes, like ITLs are extremely smart and capable, and like technical skills are always fantastic, but I often find that sometimes, like just from my own experience, like speaking to certain ITLs who've reached out to me, the one thing that we can be lacking in is how we present ourselves, like I want to say soft skills,
Okay.
just,
Yeah.
yeah. So I think that's where we struggle. And I think that's important to make that good first impression.
So
That's so important.
yeah. So let's talk about the soft skills, because I think what we're getting at perhaps is firm culture,
Yeah.
maybe, and jiving in with the firm culture, and maybe, coming from a different background or a different country, maybe, that might be new to you. How does one go about discovering what that culture is? And how can you, because you had this great 2-year run up before your articles even, how do you think somebody can figure that out and make themselves more presentable, as you say? um, of course, there's the networking, as you mentioned, and there's coming out to any sessions that would be very helpful. Is there anything else you think candidates might be able to do in trying to break through and understand the culture at some of the firms?
Yeah, I mean, like obviously like you don't want to pretend like you're somebody else in this process, because like you have to turn up to work every day, and like these are going to be your colleagues and friends for the foreseeable future. And so you want to be your true to who you are, but also I think putting your best self forward, because the thing that I think and I understand that most Bay Street firms look for is making sure that, like, because when you work with someone, and especially as a lawyer, like you spend so many hours a day interacting with these people, and like you're on difficult matters together, or like you're overnight on a deal or whatever it is. And so you want to be with someone who's like easy to get along with, like personable, and someone that is a good colleague and could potentially be a work friend as well. And so like I think that's where I think it's good to put yourself in their situation and think about what it is that they could be potentially looking for from a candidate. And not just what I know. We're always eager to be like, oh, this is all the things that I did on my resume. But sometimes it's not that. It's like sometimes it's that extra little spark that they're looking for, that curiosity maybe that this person exuded, or the spirit, or like just how bright or intelligent they were in answering a question that maybe was not was unexpected, how quick they were to think on their feet. So sometimes it's not just about what's on your resume and what the things that you've done. It's just that extra, like, okay, will this person help me out when I'm having a rough day, and will they be willing to take on something extra to help me, or will they go above and beyond in difficult situations? It's things like that they're looking for. And obviously it's difficult to go to every Bay Street firm and be like, what is the culture here? No, it's not about that. It's just about like knowing very generally, like thinking about it from the perspective of the firm and what they could be looking for in a candidate. Because ultimately what I've noticed is that people, like, it is a very competitive, very cutthroat business, and like it's not anything personal, but like people coming out of Canadian law schools are extremely smart, intelligent, like they've worked towards that moment in their lives, and they're putting everything on the line in that moment when they come in for their interviews, and they're applying for their 1L and 2L. And so it's being able to position yourself in a way that's at a competitive advantage to them. So like thinking about it from what all the things that they've done and how you would present yourself in that situation. So like even small things, like when you reach out to someone to network, don't just be like, hey, this is what I'm doing. Can you tell me about this? Like I've seen that so often, and that's sort of rude. And it's not personal, and like people are busy, like they don't have to respond to you. So taking that extra effort, showing that you are really interested in connecting with this person, making sure you add that personal touch, checking your cover notes before you send them across, because I've had people call me all different things and not accept my name. So, I'm not a deciding authority in any way, but I'm just saying, like, if I was the deciding authority and like someone called me maybe Tina instead of what my name is, because you forgot to change the name in your template cover note that you've been sending across, that could mean not getting a response. So just like really thinking about it and taking the time, because like I said, it's a competitive market. So, if you really want to get ahead, then you have to put in that time and effort.
Thank you. I think that's wow. There's a lot to take in there, and that's a lot of useful information. Um, can I take you back to, the time you're working as a legal assistant? Did the firm know you were going through the licensing process?
Yeah, I was very forthcoming with the fact that, because I mean, I didn't take, like, I graduated from law school, and so that was on my resume, obviously, and so they knew that I had a legal background. So I was forthcoming about it, but for me, I knew that I wasn't in a rush to get into my exams right away, and so I let them know that I'm not running to get my to be called to the bar. I'm not rushing to do it, and I'm going to take my time. And so in the meantime, I'd like to, under like have work experience on Bay Street. So yeah, and like when I did start the process as well, I definitely kept the workplace updated on what I was doing and what my plans were, but in a respectful way.
Did you have an expectation that you might get in the articling position? How did that work out?
Um, I did not have an expectation. I'm just the kind of person that I take it one step at a time, and like this process can be very overwhelming. So I wasn't thinking that far ahead, to be completely honest. I was like, let me knock the exams out of the way, because that is within my control. Like studying and like making sure that I pass is well within my control. And so I just focused on getting the NCAs, and I actually did my bar exams before my articles. Like I know a lot of people go into articles and then do their bar exam during the 10-day break that they get, but I didn't do that. I finished my bar exams before I even like asked if I could apply to be an articling student. And I think that was to my benefit, because articling was like the last thing on my plate, and so that was all I had to worry about, and I knew that all my exams were out of the way.
So, so how did that, work out? Because obviously the recruiters at the time, they don't know much about, ITLs. As you said, it wasn't a big thing yet at Bay Street. Did you have a champion in your corner? Did you have someone fighting for you, going at bat to try and get you into that articling cycle? What was that experience like?
Yeah, I definitely had some champions at the firm. I was lucky, but I also, made sure that I showcased what it is that I want, like I was capable of, and also made clear that, you know, I had bigger goals than just being an assistant. Um, and so I did have people in my corner, and I made sure to stay in touch with them. I made sure to be communicative. I let them know at every stage and every step, that, you know, that I was getting ahead. And I think that all those things definitely help when I eventually mustered up enough courage to be like, can I apply? Oh, sorry.
Mhm.
Yeah, if I could apply to come back to article at the firm. But yes, definitely, if I had not spent the time networking internally, I think that things would have gone differently. But um, I yeah, like throughout the process, like I definitely stayed in touch, because even though I didn't necessarily believe that I would make it back into Osler.
Mhm.
Um, Bay Street is, it's big, but it's also small. It's a small world. People know people, and you know, if you make a good enough impression, you never know who's willing to make that phone call or connect you over email. And so I think that regardless, like making connections is very, very important. And it goes a long way because, you know, your legal career, I would assume, is not a 1 year or 2 year thing. It's a long road ahead. And so
Mhm.
maintaining those connections will help you. You never know any at some point down the line.
Yeah. Um, so let's talk about the articling experience. I don't know if you remember far back to the articling experience, but I'm guessing there's certain rotations that you do. And do you remember your rotations, and what can you tell us about that experience?
Yeah, so my rotations, like we had 4 rotations, and I did um litigation because I thought that that was definitely key, for a well-rounded articling experience. And then I also did employment and labor, which is what I'm currently doing. I also did a rotation with the department that deals with like startups and scale up companies and like that kind of thing. So on the corporate side of things, which is a very dynamic area of law because like it is such a niche expertise to have, especially today with the number of like startup ventures come up that are coming up. Like I think being an expert in that field is so it's very unique, and I think can be very rewarding. And then my last rotation, I did a double litigation, which was,
Okay,
yeah,
so you went back
I went
for,
back.
for the for the final.
Yeah.
And were you rotating with the same group of students? Like how many articling students, or do they just go separate ways? How does that work?
No, everyone goes separate ways. So you're really on your own, like how you decide, you know, what it is that you want to do. Of course, like you have to make sure to make friends in your articling class, and because like some of my good friends are in other groups, and we there, especially at bigger law firms, there's always that cross-functional aspect. So making friends during articles is important because then you get to message them and be like, hey, I have a question about, you know, I don't know, something to do with banking, or
Mhm.
like these things come up. So again, like key takeaway is like making those connections and maintaining them. And um you know, and yeah, I no longer see them as connections because now they're actually my good friends. So
Mm.
um yeah, so yeah, that's, I think everyone just goes their own way. So you can definitely, I think it's important to think about what it is that you want to do. And I think having different rotations definitely helped me because it helped me land in the spot that I wanted to be in, and I'm happy and thriving.
Tell us a little bit about, working in any one of those rotations. What is it like to be, an articling student, an articled student at Bay Street? Do you experience, imposter syndrome? Or are they super supportive? Like, what's going on when you're there as a student?
Yeah, I always have imposter syndrome. I still do, but I like. my own personal experience at Osler has been fantastic. Like they are always there to support you. They're always people available for you to talk to on a bad day. So that's it. So that's I think that's why it's important to use those, like I mentioned earlier, like the firm, I forget what they're called, but basically do the firm walkthroughs, because you get an opportunity to see the firm, and then you just whether this is where you want to interview or come back to. So that's always a good thing. And so I was always sure that this is where I wanted to stay, and it's a good workplace. um so articles, like it's obviously it's a tough transition. It's a learning curve, especially for me. I had taken a bit of a break before. Like when I was working as assistant, I didn't really do any legal work, and so I had taken a break from that. And so like rewiring my brain as an articling student and starting to think as someone who has accountability, and like, of course, like they're not asking you to run with the entire file, like that's not going to happen, but still, like focusing your mind towards accountability and autonomy, and knowing that what you do is so important for the next person above you to review and be able to take next steps. And I think that was the most important thing during articles for me, because by no means I don't think they expect you to be perfect or know what you're doing. A lot of people don't, and a lot of people come from different backgrounds. Like a lot of people don't have, like, yes, they're in law school, but their undergrad was probably in like engineering or something completely unrelated to law. And so I think coming in there, but like really putting your best foot forward. Like I can't stress this enough, because they just need to know that you are putting in your 100% and you've made that effort. So like, not like proofreading your work, something as maybe someone may think that's insignificant, but like I think that is so important. Like submitting work that I think they just know. They, like, someone will know that you've put in
The
effort.
effort.
Yeah, and I think that's important. So I don't think you need to know everything, but it's because they do treat articling as a learning experience, and so you're there to learn. But again, going back to like soft skills, like your technical skills are, you can build those, but having those soft skills, knowing what it is that you should um, focus on, not making sure you don't make like silly mistakes, making sure you're responsive. um yeah, yeah, I think those things are important during articles.
Amazing. So there's no like Lewis Litt from Suits
No,
writing this,
no,
writing
Sneha
this.
is like the most unrealistic show ever. I have no idea if they did anything on that show, but
Oh, it's what we wish law would be like. um, okay. So, you know, emotionally supportive is what I got from like colleagues. Super supportive on the emotional side. If you're having a bad day, everybody's just great with each other. What's the training like? Is it regular for articling students specifically? Do they tell you what they expect from you? Do they take you through some sort of training courses? What does that look like?
yeah, I think that there is training, and there is a lot of like support and PD. PD doesn't stop. Like you continue doing PD throughout your career. That's important. At least in Ontario, there's a requirement, so you don't stop doing PD. So um, that's definitely key, and I think that most Bay Street firms provide it. Um, but I think it's important to know that no one is going to tell you exactly what to do. That's where I think it's important to harness all you're learning, like what, because I know like ITLs, some ITLs have like tons of experience before they come in, like 10 years of experience, 20 years of experience. But then when you come in, just because you're an articling student doesn't mean that, you don't have to try. You still have to. Like making sure that you're still doing the best work possible. Because yeah, like I said, like no one's going to, I think someone said this during one of their speeches, but they were like, there are no stupid questions. But if you're not going to do any legwork before you ask the question, then, is there a possibility that it could be like, if you could have found the answer yourself and you still choose to make that a question, then that's on you. Like, I think it's important to know where, like, if you, like, you have to be like smart and practical about how you harness the resources available to you, because they're not going to point to this and say, oh, this is what you can read to better your, that's something for you to do. So you do the legwork and then they'll like help you, so this, because it's not school anymore, like it is a workplace, and for all intents and purposes, like you are contributing towards the workplace, and it's meant to be a profitable endeavor, and so you can't just expect everything to be spoon fed to you.
Mm. And do you think maybe, how do I put this? ITL's maybe at a slight disadvantage because, your experience is a bit unique. You had 2 years of legal assistant background. You got to know that software. You got to know the tools the lawyers were using. So you now, okay, this is how they're searching information. This is what they're doing. How does an ITL go about doing that? Because they may have more questions coming in. They might not know, okay, where do I go research this thing? I don't know. I've never used these tools before. What can they do to prepare for that? Is there anything they can do?
So with things like that, like I think that an ITL is in the same situation as someone who's coming in from a Canadian law school, because they're also new to the workplace. And so things with software and tools are always like things that are trainable. And so you will be given the training on those aspects.
Cool.
So that's, I think, that's not something that, is should put anyone at a disadvantage, because like you will just be the same as someone from a Canadian law school is also coming into the firm for the first time, and you and them will be seeing it for the first time. So that shouldn't be it. Like I think if anything, like we talked about, like the disadvantage, if at all, would be from not, you know, I guess not sufficiently or appropriately knowing how to handle how do I put this? Like, I guess there are certain like social cues and like expectations when it comes to a Canadian workplace. And I think keeping that in mind is important.
Any chance you can give us an example of
Oh my
something
gosh.
like that?
No, that's
What do you mean by? I mean, you mean something, right? Like a social cue. Um,
like
what,
that's, I mean, I think it is like, it's just what I said, like from my own personal experience, when people have reached out to me, I found them to be like very abrupt and like frankly like really rude and like not, and I understand, yes, like at least like back home I'm sure that that's how a conversation would have started, maybe not, I don't know, but I think here, like, there is like something, small talk is important, like for example, like like introducing yourself, like um it's like building a connection doesn't happen in an instant, and it can't happen when you just say, hey, I just got to Canada yesterday and I was hoping to do my NCAs, can you tell me a little bit about that? Like no one's like, I feel no inclination to respond to such a message. And so just
Yeah,
Yeah,
because that information is easily available. They should
exactly.
have done the background, the
Yeah,
research,
yeah,
um, and yeah, so doing your homework, being respectful of people's time,
yes,
researching the individual that you're reaching out to.
yeah,
What are their interests? Do I have a connection? And also thinking about what you can offer them, perhaps, rather than always, trying to take something. But it's got
yeah,
to be a two-way kind of relationship,
yeah,
perhaps. And
definitely.
that's
I
what I tell
definitely,
people.
yeah.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and as again, like I've seen people do this, but I definitely know that there have been a lot of there's been a lot of interest, and I know other ITLs who've made it into Bay Street law firms, even without taking the path that I've taken. So
Can we kind of transition now from articling to being an associate? First, I'd like to talk about what is the process of, you finished your articles. I'm pretty sure that not everybody gets a callback, right? So how does that actually work? Is it an additional interview process or an application process? What happens when your articles finish?
yeah, so I can't speak to other law firms. I personally didn't have to go through an additional interview process or um, any further rounds, but um, I'm not, again, like I can't really talk about like callback and what criteria, like I'm
Well,
really
just your own experience,
Yeah, my own
of what that was like.
experience, yeah, I think that for me, my focus was making sure that I impressed the people that I was working with in the departments that I was working at because um especially litigation, employment and labor, because I knew that I potentially wanted to go back to these departments. And so my focus was making sure that I work with as many people as possible. I had several like, just like coffee chats and like walks and like meeting with the associates, understanding what their work life is like, understanding what the different streams of work are, what the different practice areas are, etc. And like knowing um how it is that they balance their like targets and PD and all of the other things that are required of a lawyer, because it's not just your practice, right? Like you have to do like non-billable work, like you have to like focus on like professional development. You also need to like dabble in things outside of the work sphere, like you need to socialize, you need to attend events, you need to be part of other associations. So like just learning like which ones I would like to dabble in, what interests me the most. Like I think I used that transition and that transition period to understand these things and also get a sense of how I would manage my own practice. Like these are things that I think that you need to focus on during articles, like like knowing how long you would spend on a certain task, knowing when to stop, um,
Mm,
when you hit a dead end, knowing when you hit a dead end, like who can I approach to like ask a question? How do I redirect or like adjust my approach to something? Knowing what my resources are within the firm or even outside of. Um, yeah, and yeah, definitely, like I said, like making sure that I made a good impression on the people within the departments that I potentially wanted to go back to. Because that's key. And like in the end, like it's their decision, it's the department's decision, like if they want someone to come back or so that's one of the factors. And so I think making a good impression on the people that you're immediately working with is an important thing to focus on during articles.
mhm. So it sounds like, your people skills, those soft skills come back again, and those are probably the most important deciding factor. Well, of course, the work, right? you have to be producing good work, but you can expect everybody to be producing good work at that point,
Yes.
right? So it's like, what makes you different, what makes you stand out, and it's those connections and it's those relationships that you build as you go through this process, right?
Yeah.
That's very insightful. That's very good. What would you say? And I'm sorry, I didn't. I gave you a list of questions. I don't think I've asked any of those questions that we've had. So this is totally unrehearsed between the two of us. Um, what's one of the greatest changes or difficult changes going from articling to associate? What's the thing that you know you experienced that's very different from the two?
Yeah, with articles, I think that everything was always now and immediate and discreet because um, it's like fast paced and um because you're rotating, it's not like you're expected to be, they know that it's like short lived, and so it's not like you're going to run from the commencement of the file all the way to the very end. So mostly it's discrete tasks, and the focus isn't too much on what happens through the life cycle of a file, but more so on your quality of work for that particular task. But I think as you graduate to associate life, it's more about more accountability and more autonomy and more responsibility on files, making sure you see them through, making sure you know what the next step is, and ensuring you're not missing any deadlines. And just, I find that, like, it's at least during these stages, like there's always someone above you who's like helping you, advising you, guiding you, and reviewing your work and making sure that it they are probably the person that's client facing. Like your client facing days are probably limited in during these initial years, and so using that opportunity to learn as much as you can from those people, and see how they deal with like client management, because that's important, because eventually that's a skill set that you have to learn, like um and also when you're given something, I find, I'm not saying this is necessary, but I find when I'm given something, I don't just do that. Like, yes, I do it, but I also make sure that I'm like thinking about what's next. And, what extra can I do to make that person's life easier? Can I brief them on what's going to happen next or what needs to happen next? Or, and like making sure I like, making sure when the next thing has to happen on a file. Like, like these, again, like these aren't really technical skills. They're just, it's those little things that someone will say, oh, you know what? Like, yeah, like I almost missed this deadline. Thank you for telling me. And so that's going to stay with this person. So just things like this is what I mean when I say, like it's those, I don't know what to call it. What kind of skill would that be? Like, I don't know.
I just thinking ahead or planning ahead
Yeah, like
and
managing.
perhaps
Yeah,
trying to deliver more than's expected of you.
yeah, yeah.
Perhaps. That's very insightful. Um, and I guess the next question, and maybe this would be different for each person, department to department, and even law firm. But when are you expected to carry a file on your own and actually have your name on that file as a lawyer? Um, you know, at what point is it a first year associate, a second year associate? At what point do you start becoming client facing?
Yeah, I
And
think that, like you said, I think it's very different. I think it differs
mhm,
based on what firm you're at, what department you're in, what area of law you're in. I find that it's very different. Depends on the individual and how. But I find that I don't think that, like, yes, like client facing, sure, like that will all happen, but
mhm,
I still think that having a a guide, an advisor, a mentor, I don't think there's any age at which that stops happening, because I still see like I still see really senior lawyers like reaching out to even their peers for advice, so that doesn't I don't think that ever stops, but I think being client facing and having more autonomy, I think it's just a natural evolution, and I don't think anyone should be in a rush to do it necessarily, because I think it's one of those things where you keep trying and one day you don't realize that you're doing it. You're doing it, and you just don't you didn't even know when it happened.
Mhm. Um, I'll wrap up with the last question in a bit, but I wanted to thank you first of all, again for your time. I know you've taken out your lunch to be with us and to talk to internationally trained lawyers. You were once there before, and of course, I know you really care about people going through this process. So
Mhm.
thank you so much for taking that time out. Um, I know there's a lot of pressure on you to perform and do other things, and of course, you're involved socially in a lot of things, so it means a lot. Thank you. Perhaps we can just end with, um, I mean, thinking about our discussion and the interview. Is there anything else you wish, going back to when you were, before you were even articling? What sort of things do you think is important to keep in mind as an ITL going through this process? What's the one takeaway, even something we've already talked about, whether it's networking or something like that? What's that one takeaway you think people should have from this discussion here?
um yeah, so like I'll talk about the one takeaway, but I also want to mention one thing to definitely keep in
Mhm.
mind. The takeaway, I think, would be, like I said, to make sure that you're not rushing through your cover notes, your emails, whatever it is, when you're connecting with someone, really thinking about it, putting in that effort, and taking the time to do it right. Because believe me, they will know. They will know if you just shot this out in like 5 seconds or you actually took the time and really wanted to connect with them. And I think that is a very thin line that we need to know how to different distinguish between. Um, the other thing that I wanted to say, and I think everyone should think about this, because hindsight is 2020, and I can say this confidently now, but I know that this is a very long and lonely journey. And I know there are times that I felt absolutely, it was so bleak from where I was standing, and I was so helpless and hopeless. But I think that it does take time. So you have to be patient with yourself and with the process, because just because the process ends doesn't mean your challenges are ending. Like once you become a lawyer, like it has its own challenges, and like it's a lifelong career. Like you carry it with you, you take all your learnings with you every year and on to the next. And so it's important to remember that all of this is an investment in your career. So think of it as that. So it's a positive thing, it is not a negative thing. Be kind to yourself, and like stay in touch with your peers during this time, because they're going through the exact same thing. They are not your competition. There is no competition here. Like it is a competitive field, but treating the next ITL as your competition and like treating them badly or like not helping them when they need it is not going to help you in any way. I think that's principally like not the best way to move forward, because like I said, like your peers will serve you well as you enter this journey. So remembering that, I think, is key.
Lovely. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for
Yeah.
all of the useful insights. I know people will find this discussion very useful. We'll leave it up, of course, on our YouTube channels, and I think there's a playback option on LinkedIn as well. And of course, we're streaming on some of our Facebook pages. So thank you very much again for your time. And for the audience, I hope to see you again very soon, where we're planning additional discussions with lawyers in various fields working at various different firms, whether it's Bay Street or smaller boutique firms. And I hope that this information is very useful to you and will help you along that path. So, like Sneha said, so you don't feel lonely in this process. Thank you, everyone, and have a good day.
Thanks, Leon.
Bye.
Bye.